So if you will, John, tell us a little bit about the mysteries and what you mean with the mysteries in regards to your writing and research, John.
Well, the mysteries, as you know, have been one of the primary subjects of my work. Certainly, my book, Not in His Image, contains more information and elaboration about the nature of the mysteries, their origin, the practices that were done in them, and so forth, than any other book, to my knowledge. Don't want to be blowing my own horn here, but it is simply a fact, as far as I know, that you will not find any other book or any other source on the internet which gives you such an intimate and complete view of what the pagan mysteries were. The mysteries of the pagan world, the Mediterranean world, and the Near East and Egypt during the centuries before the Christian era. And I'd like to say here, to start out, just before we go into the subject, that I'd like to pose a question, well, why is this subject so important? Because after all, the mysteries that we're going to talk about a little bit here are very ancient. They were eliminated, radically destroyed. Their teachers were persecuted and murdered. A large part of almost all of the literature of the mysteries was destroyed, burned. And there were no mysteries practiced, no mystery religions and no mystery cults operating in Europe after the death of Hypatia in 415 AD. As you know, that incident of the murder of Hypatia is the opening chapter of my book.
Yes.
So I would like to say, well, what are we doing here? Why are we dragging ourselves back into this ancient religious movement, this ancient spiritual movement, which is long dead? Why is it important? I think that at the end of this interview, I hope that at the end of this interview, it will be clear to your listeners that our knowledge of what the mysteries were is important, because the mysteries are part of the solution. They were part of the solution for humanity when they existed, and they are part of the solution today. Whereas all that we learn on the internet and in many, many books about the Illuminati, the reptilian bloodlines, the use of mind control and occultism in a master program of totalitarian control, all that we hear about this is all about the problem. And we hear a lot about this. But the mysteries are about the solution. And I truly believe that if we go back and look at what the mysteries were in their true nature and what was done in the mysteries, it will provide us with the right orientation to face the situation in the world today and this apparent takeover of society by a totalitarian or globalist elite. So that's why the subject is so important.
Absolutely.
I hope that's clear.
Absolutely. And maybe if you like, in brief here, John, you can also tell us a little bit about the basically your background in terms, well, what I reckon got you started in all this. So we can talk about the philosophies of Friedrich Nietzsche a little bit and how he influenced your life and your work as well. Is he the primary philosopher who got your eyes open to these subjects to begin with, John?
Well, Nietzsche, I mentioned Nietzsche in the beginning, in the preface to my book, Not in His Image. And I describe in there how when I encountered Thus Spake Zarathustra, and I read a little bit of Nietzsche. I was only 17 at the time. I was living in a very small fishing village in Maine called Friendship, Maine. And I had nobody to, talk to, but I was deeply impacted by this philosopher. I have to say that what impressed me about Nietzsche was that he dared to say that Christianity was a crapulent and dangerous faith. And since I was living in a tiny little community of 900 people that was dominated by a Christian cult, I was happy to hear that someone of his stature say that, because that's exactly how I felt at the age of 17. And so the way that I have followed Nietzsche and attempted to complete his work is in his critique of Christianity. because he didn't really critique Christianity very well. He only pointed out a couple of things about it. And I vowed when I read Nietzsche that I would carry that critique to its final conclusion, which is what I do. And I want to point out that I have nothing against Christians as people. I've lived with Christians. I've known many of them all my life. I'm talking about the belief system and the ideology of Christianity. I'm talking about a belief system. I'm not talking about flesh and blood people. I do not hate Christians, but I do despise the belief system that has established itself in the world as Christianity. And as you know, I have analyzed that belief system at length. I call it salvationism, and it's a salvationist faith. And I truly believe that this salvationist faith is a toxic ideology. It's a pathological and psychotic outbreak of the human mind, and it's very dangerous for our species. So it was Nietzsche that initially put me on that path of, gave me the boost, you could say, to make my critique of Christianity, which you'll find in Not in His Image. But as far as the mysteries are concerned, that's a different story. Nietzsche didn't write anything about the mysteries, and it was not through Nietzsche that I got turned in that direction.
But there's one thing in Nietzsche that kind of a little bit dovetails with this idea as well. I mean, he wrote about the concept of the Superman, for instance, and, and the Nazis have been, blamed for adopting this idea a little bit as well, and they were also, from their point of view, then steeped in the occult and have occult roots and so forth, and that this spawned this murderous, volatile political philosophy, pretty much. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. First of all, I want to say that I do not adopt or endorse Nietzsche's concept of the Superman in the sense of any kind of fascist or authoritarian super race theory or master race theory. Absolutely do not endorse it at all. I think it's despicable, and I have no interest in that. And I did not pick up that element in Nietzsche. I did not take Nietzsche's writings about the Superman in that direction. There are a number of key claims that are made about the mysteries and Gnostics in connection with the mysteries that really need to be corrected. And one of these is the claim of deification, that is, the turning of a human being into a god, or in the same sense, achieving a superhuman state. Something that you will often read in writings of scholars who expound about the mysteries, and also in talks of current people who are saying that there was something bad in the mysteries. They will both give you the same piece of information. They will say that the goal of initiation in the ancient pagan mysteries was some kind of deification. That is to say, the turning of the human being into a divine being, or the realization of some divine empowerment. Well, that is simply not the case. It is not the case in the sense that initiation in the mysteries would have fostered in people a sense of being superhuman or godlike and therefore superior to all other people. Not at all. The experience of initiation in the mysteries allowed those who underwent it to discover their own hidden powers, especially the hidden power of nous, or the divine intelligence. The point that I make, which no other scholar seems to have made, is that the elevation of human consciousness in the mysteries, the heightened awareness, was not an inflation of the ego to a godlike state. It was the discovery of one's divine intelligence. And that germ of divine intelligence exists in everyone. The mysteries were egalitarian movement. It's totally wrong to assume that they could have been the incubation tanks for elitist power freaks. It's totally wrong. There is no historical basis for that. That is a completely unfounded claim. As a matter of fact, history tells us that The mysteries were open to all people. They were open to everyone of every age or every class. Slaves could participate in the mysteries as well as emperors, and they did. So the mysteries were egalitarian, and they did not have at their heart any kind of agenda that can be remotely compared to an Illuminati, fascist, totalitarian control scheme. That is entirely false, and I would challenge anyone who has made that claim, for instance, David Icke, to come forth with the evidence that that was the case. When you go into the evidence that exists historically about the mysteries, you will find that they were not at all of that character. So that's one of the things that's concerned me lately, and we talked about this before the interview, is that you find this claim coming up more and more as people are exposing the agenda of the globalist elite, which I'm totally in favor of. At the same time that they're doing that, they're saying, oh, and by the way, don't you know that the ancient mystery religions were the source of all occult practices, and it was in these movements that the forerunners of this globalist elite learned their sinister game. Absolutely and totally wrong. And that's a very serious error to make, because as I said at the beginning of this talk, the mysteries are part of the solution. They are not part of the problem. And so if we contaminate them by association with the solution, I think we're going to be making a very serious error there.
Okay, well, there's a few points here then that we can talk about right away. If you
Sure.
look at the, basically about the expansion of the Roman Empire, again, a lot of researchers are drawing the connection between the Roman Empire and Christianity when we have the Christianization with the Constantine and so forth of the Roman Empire.
Right.
And then to a lot of researchers, the Roman Empire has a history in pagan religion. What can you say about that? Many people would then say, "Oh, look at that! That's evidence that the roots of the whole project here that began are actually pagan in their origin."
Yeah, well, Christianity through Constantine, and I have a comment about him coming up here in a minute. Christianity through Constantine, who effectuated the marriage of Christianity with the Roman state, has nothing to do with the indigenous paganism of the Roman people, the inhabitants of the empire. The inhabitants of the Roman Empire were many different nationalities: Italian, Spanish, or Iberian, Greek, even the Brythonic peoples of the British Isles, as you know, came under the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was a vast organization, but the populace of the Roman Empire were pagans. And when Constantine, was the first Christian emperor, right? Constantine was about as much of a Christian as George Bush,
Yeah.
That's the kind of Christian he was. Even his official historian, Eusebius, said of Constantine that he wasn't sure that his conversion was an act, a political act, or whether it was genuine.
Right.
But in any case, it had to be portrayed as genuine, because you have to write a good story about the people who are in power. I mean, even the historian who gave us that story of Constantine's conversion is admitting bald-facedly how phony it was. The purpose of that story was so that there would be a nice, pretty conversion story to convince people that there was something authentic at the basis of the marriage of the Roman military empire and Christianity. The Roman military empire merged with Christianity to become the Holy Roman Empire. But the paganism, the indigenous paganism of the people who lived under the Roman Empire, did not merge with Christianity at all. So you have to make that distinction.
And do you think it's therefore today that we have a lot of the pagan blend, if you know what I mean, with Christianity? In that sense, we can look at the winter solstice celebration.
It's very kind to call it a blend, Henrik. It's just a pure ripoff. One remark that I found quite alarming occurs in the beginning of this film called Esoteric Agenda, which is an expose in some respects of the Codex Alimentarius. And one of the remarks, I think this film is done by someone called Ben Sherman.
Ben Stewart. We've
Ben
had
Stewart,
him on the program, actually, yes.
One of the things that Ben Stewart says is that Christianity is permeated with pagan symbolism and ritual. And he infers from that paganism survives in a manner in Christianity. He says paganism in its evolution, that's his exact term, meaning as it developed or morphed, paganism morphed or survived in Christianity. Nothing could be less true at all. Let me give you an analogy. Suppose a group of people came into your house, of your family, of you and your brothers and sisters and your mother and father, and they took everything that's in your house, all of your personal belongings, your records, your diaries, your clothes, and they moved them to another house and wore all your clothes and kept all your diaries and photographs around and actually took over your life and stole your identity. But they could not actually live your life, could they?
No.
It would be a stolen identity. So likewise, paganism, the true life of paganism, could never be stolen. And so the true life and spirit of paganism did not survive in Christianity, did not survive at all, except in very remote country areas of Europe, very areas where people still clung to their pre-Christian rituals and beliefs. What happened was that Christianity simply ripped off the rituals and the symbols of paganism and used them for their own purposes, because it was easy. That was an easy way to get the pagan people to believe that Christianity was similar to what they already embraced.
Right.
Know?
That's the smooth transition, because otherwise, if it would have been too foreign, the people would never have accepted it. They wouldn't let it into their lives.
And they would have rejected it, and they did reject it.
Mm.
You know, a great part of the pagan world for centuries, let's say that the rise of Christianity began actually with the Zadokite cult in Palestine around 150 BC, before the supposed historical Jesus. And so there's a period of about 150 BC up until about 450 AD. There's like more than 500 years when Christianity had to, gradually took over. There was an enormous resistance in the pagan world at that time. A number of the pagan intellectuals who were the teachers and highly respected figures of that time totally rejected Christianity as a pestilence. They called it a virus and a plague. They said it was a despicable faith. Why? Mainly for one reason, which I've pointed out in my book. Christianity glorifies the redemptive value of suffering.
Mm.
And that is totally contrary to pagan beliefs. A pagan will define later on, maybe at more length, what I'm calling a pagan. But a pagan is a person who does not believe that human suffering has a divine purpose. That is a very perverted idea from a pagan point of view. Mm. So there's great resistance to this belief system of Christianity and to the supernaturalism of the Messiah. There's no Messiah in any pagan religions. There's no equivalent to the Messiah. And I have to say that, unfortunately, some comparative mythologists, apart from myself, who are highly respected in this world, have led people to believe that, the Christian Messiah, Jesus Christ the Messiah, is similar to other figures in pagan religion or pagan culture, such as Balder in Norse myth or Angus in Celtic myth. This is a false parallel. The supernatural Messiah, whose suffering has supreme magical value of saving the world, is unique to the belief system of Christianity. And pagan people would not have that belief. They would not have accepted that belief if it wasn't put over on them in a very clever way. Mm. And one of the clever ways was to say, well, we're going to adopt, don't resist us, because we're going to adopt your symbols and rituals. And you'll see, we'll just use them in our way, but it'll really be the same game. And it wasn't the same game at all. And at the very same time that the early Christians in Europe adopted and co-opted pagan symbols and rituals. They were ferociously busy eliminating the pagan tradition of books and learning and destroying the mystery centers and persecuting the leaders of those centers. So they played that double game.
Well, that's a good point. I wanted to ask you about that then, if you believe it's true that the Roman Empire and through them and through the military empire that you mentioned, basically they started the execution of the Gnostic people. They killed people who had the knowledge from the ancient world, and in one sense they might have extracted it for themselves, or it might have been lost, as it claimed in many texts and so forth, that the literature and so forth was burned and all was lost. I still think that some amount of that knowledge was taken into the top echelons within the Roman Empire, but that's difficult to say. But basically, would you say that they started the execution of the learned elders, as it were?
Well, they certainly did, and there is historical evidence of that. And the might of the Roman Empire, once the empire was turned, but was united with the new religion, some of it was directed toward the persecution of paganism. Paganism and pagan rituals and beliefs were ruled forbidden on penalty of death already around 385 A.D. And why would you need to do that?
Yeah.
But ask this question: anybody out there who believes that Christianity was originally, or in any sense still is, a religion of love, then wouldn't you say that coexistence is essential to love?
Yeah, of course.
That coexistence would be one of the first proofs of love. That if you carry love in your heart and you carry love in your relation to other human beings, that you would show them an attitude of coexistence. Isn't that reasonable? Well, when you look at the historical record, there is absolutely no record of early Christian ideologues or converts wanting to coexist with pagans or with the leaders and representatives of the mystery schools. They did everything they could to eliminate them, and in many cases, Henrik, they didn't need the force of the military force of the Roman Empire to do that. The monks, who were early monks, who were created to who were converted to Christianity, were like stormtroopers. And one historian describing the takeover of Egypt by Christianity actually uses that term. Says that the Christian monks were so fanatical they were like stormtroopers. They went into the ancient sanctuaries of mystery knowledge in Egypt, the temples of Luxor, the temples of Dendera, which is close to Nag Hammadi, and the temples of Memphis and around Cairo, and they fanatically destroyed and burned all these books. It didn't need the military to do it. The religious converts did it themselves. And the history of the rise of Christianity is a history of a cultural genocide of an enormous magnitude. And one of the reasons why we have lost our way in this world and why we have become a species that can be manipulated and controlled by a small psychotic group of our own members is because the mysteries and the wisdom in the mysteries was destroyed, and we lost the foundation of our species vision. This, as you know, you've read my book. This is a story that I tell in my book.
And in one way, the warring monks that you mentioned, we can tie these in together with the Knights Templar, then, and the Knights of Malta, and these various group who were performing during the Crusades as well. But there are earlier versions of this as well.
Absolutely. This business of the long-term history of these secret orders and the Masons and the Illuminati and everything is very, very complicated. And I'm afraid sometimes that we might get a little lost and too absorbed in that. Again, that's all part of the problem, I think we know enough about the problem now, since we can never know enough about the problem, but I think we know as much about the problem as we need to know to start putting the solution together really fast. And one of the things that I would say is that whenever you have military orders and secret orders, you're not talking about the mysteries or anything derived from them. The mysteries were not like that. They had no military factor whatsoever. And that's one of the reasons why they could have been wiped out.
Yes,
and why they couldn't protect themselves.
We had a gentleman called Gary Biltcliffe a while back on the program, and he, for instance, told about the Etruscans, the pre-Roman civilization, and basically how their knowledge of the building of the aqueducts and certain things were basically ripped, by the Roman Empire, and they gained a lot of their knowledge from this allegedly then very, very friendly people, and they had a lot of valuable information that the Roman Empire used in order to expand in the manner that they did.
Oh, totally. The Etruscans were an indigenous people of Italy who generously and freely gave to the foundations of Roman culture, and then they were, of course, eliminated when they had given what they had to give, and they didn't fit into the particular power structure that the Romans were creating in that time and setting. It's just tremendously important that we need to understand that the great orchestration of evil, if you want to call it social evil. I don't believe in cosmic evil, as you know, Henrik, in absolute or cosmic evil or some satanic or demonic force in the universe, but I do believe in social evil. And so what is social evil? It's just an expression of a human psychosis. It's an expression of a breakdown of the human mind and of a pathology that can run rampant and is doing so now. But when we're trying to trace, we're humans and we're fascinated by what happened to us and how we could be in this terribly frightening world that we live in today. And so we're going back and trying to understand this orchestration, and we're digging up all this information about these secret societies and these Knights Templars. In the process of doing all that, fine, let's not forget that there was an inviolable teaching and an inviolable core of human wisdom that has nothing to do with that. And that was preserved in the mysteries. And that's why the mysteries, even though they were destroyed, live inside us today. I don't believe we can recreate the mysteries as such in the form that they were, say, 400 or 500 BC, or even during the time of couple of centuries after the Christian era. It's not about recreating them, it's about rediscovering what the mysteries were in our own human potential. And that's where the solution lies. I really believe that is where the solution lies, and I believe it's time to start talking as much about the solution as about the problem.
And that's something that we want to do here. I want to ask you a few things more before that. For instance, the schism then, or the psychotic, if you will, or a schizophrenic rather, a relationship to the message of Christ. Again, it's very difficult because you can pick certain things and interpret that in a certain way and so forth, but the overall and basic idea of Christ and, love your neighbor, be kind, show love, things like that, how can that message, so to speak, be taken over then by this other cult, the Roman Empire, and later on Christianity, which expanded itself with violence and everything that goes against this message? How do you kind of explain that, if you will, John?
We've reached a point, Henrik, I think, where we have so much delved into this problem that we're at risk of getting buried in what we've learned, even if it's valid. So I'd like to propose a new way, a new kind of idiom, or a new paradigm for looking at the problem of the globalist control game. I'd like to say it's not about us or them. It's about a psychotic break in the human species. And the people who are instruments of that psychotic break are the ones who are doing the harm to the rest of the species. Okay? So it's about a psychosis, and any of us can be subject to this psychosis. And if we want to say, first recognize this psychosis, I think made some immense steps toward recognizing how this psychosis operates. You've got to realize one thing, that these people, this small globalist elite who practice all these elaborate mind control games on us, are mind controlled by their own games.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
they're not Illuminati sitting back in some state of enlightenment and pulling the strings. They are pulled by their own strings.
Right, right. Yeah.
They're as sick as the game that they perpetrate. And any of us can contract that sickness. So what we have to understand is we have to respect the sickness and how clever it is. The sickness is very clever, and it can use love or peace or anything you like to achieve its aims. You know, back in the last years or so before I left the States, I was reading about serial killers a lot and researching serial killers. And I read a couple of books about Ted Bundy.
Mm-hmm.
He's probably the most famous serial killer in the States. He killed like 16 or 20 people. And Ted Bundy is what you call, you know, a sociopath. It's an important term. These people in the globalist elite are not privileged or enlightened people who are operating from some occult tower of omnipotence. They're just very clever sociopaths. And Ted Bundy was one of the most likable guys in the world. Did you know that? He was charming, and when a certain place, I think it was in Florida, became very alarmed because a couple of college girls had been murdered by Ted Bundy. No, I think it was in Washington State. The town where it happened set up a team, a volunteer team, and Ted Bundy volunteered on that team to find himself. And he was one of the most affable and trusted members of the team that was looking for him. Now, you have to register that story just for a moment in your mind. That's the kind of people we're talking about. And they're the kind of people that can use the message of love to murder you with. And anybody can do that. Any human being can do that if they become demented enough. We're talking about a dementia, a planetary dementia. The globalist movement is not so much an orchestration of secret and powerful and privileged people. It's more or less a dementia breaking out in our species. And so we, of the species who do not want to succumb to that dementia and that psychosis, have to find, first of all, have to analyze it, recognize what it is,
Yes.
respect it for its power, but find in ourselves the immunity to resist it and the power to defeat it. And we are at that moment. We're in a countdown. We're in a countdown with this psychosis. What is stronger, you know? The power of love and enlightenment and the power of the willingness to coexist, or this control syndrome? What is stronger? You know, we are in the end time in that sense, in that we are in the end game of that process. And it's extremely important to understand, do not give these people, do not invest them with some mystical aura, you know. They are monstrous, sick people, like a serial killer sociopath. They're like that. That's the kind of people we're talking about, and they're just human beings like you and I who happen to have succumbed to this particular psychosis. Now, it's true that there are methods and schools and lineages for preserving this psychosis. I mean, that's pretty weird. But they don't originate from the mystery schools. I can guarantee you that.
Would you say that this elite that you're talking about are indeed then using certain, well, depends on how we define occult techniques, but let's leave it with that for now, occult techniques to progress this sickness or their agenda, meaning, I guess, then that the occult techniques they're using are hidden, as the word means. They're hidden to us because we are unaware of them, and therefore it's easy for us to recognize, they're using occult / esoteric knowledge to propel their agenda, John.
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm glad you bring up this question, because I think we have to be extremely careful about this talk. And I would feel more at ease if we could somehow revise our language here. You know, I hear these elaborate discussions, these elaborate expositions by people like Alan Watt, you know, explaining at length for hours on end how these people use symbols, ancient occult symbols, and they put them into the logo of these corporations, and they're controlling our minds. I think that's way, way over the top. I think that's giving them far too much power. I think that we have to deflate the notion of what is the occult, and at the same time respect the genuine value of the occult. You know, the word occult means nothing but hidden or latent. So basically, occultism is not a spooky thing. Occultism, which I have practiced all my life, I'm an occultist. What does that mean? Doesn't mean I'm a Satanist. Doesn't mean I use spooky mind control techniques on people around me. It means that I investigate and explore in the rationality and sanity of my mind the hidden potential of human beings. Occultism is about the hidden potential of human beings. And you can say that these globalist manipulators do use occultism in a certain sense, in that they know certain things about the power of suggestion and telepathy, and they know how to manipulate people largely through the subconscious. But any person who wants to make a study, who wants to dedicate 2 or 3 years of their life to studying the subconscious and all the things we know about it now, can learn everything that the Illuminati are using and 10 times more.
Yeah.
And use it for anything they like. And so to credit them with some kind of preponderant influence over us because of their occult techniques, I believe is entirely wrong. And I'm disturbed when I hear that kind of language coming from people who are genuinely trying to, to expose these perpetrators. But we have to be careful in exposing them that we don't make them look more powerful than they are.
Well, that's a very good point, John, in that sense. And do you think that that could be part of the game as well, part of the psychosis then, that give the people that the idea, the idea of perception here, that they are indeed this powerful, they have access to certain knowledge that you don't have, and hence, therefore, they will be dangerous, and you need to respect them out of fear for that purpose.
Absolutely, Henrik. There's a huge Wizard of Oz factor in the global Illuminati scam. You know? And not only that, but I have to tell you that the thing that I think about day in and day out regarding this subject, maybe we'll strike a note with other people as well. I don't know. I mean, I suspect that people who are listening to me right now have watched, these YouTube documentaries, these internet documentaries. They've listened to many clips on YouTube. They've read the articles. We've all been forming a massive picture of the operations and orchestrations that are apparently running the human social order in a very destructive way. Okay, we're all sort of on to that game. But I would ask you, have you ever wondered, well, what's the counter game?
Well, that is the big question, and it seems to me at this point that what's building up, what I can see from my point of view, is that because at the same time I recognize the urgency of getting the information out, and it can be argued if it's delivered in the right way. Is it right to give it out through fear in one way? We have the method of scaring people so they awake in one way, if you know what I mean. You have to.
That's right. That's right.
Really shake people up, in that sense. And
fear can have a positive value if it's delivered in the right dose and in a balanced way with this information.
Yes. Yes.
It is a frightening thing to think that we could be living in a society that is run by its worst specimens. I mean, that is a frightening idea.
Yeah.
But it's a really wake-up idea, because if that's the case, or if it's anything like that, then we really have to pay attention and take action, you see.
Yeah.
But any expose of the great orchestration of social evil, I'm going to call it the great orchestration of social evil and the great deception that we see, for instance, in 9/11, in the global warming scam. Any expose of that needs to be balanced by the counter magic. If there can be, I ask you, if there can be such a huge century-long orchestration toward social evil, why can't there be a huge century-long orchestration toward the overcoming of social evil?
Oh,
where is the counter myth?
Yeah.
Where is the counter magic?
Yeah.
That's the question I ask myself. Where is the counter magic? If they are using a sort of black magic on us, and I believe they are, I mean, advertising is black magic, man.
Yeah.
I have to tell you.
Yeah.
It makes me sick. I can't look at an advertising poster in the street without getting a bit nauseous. It really makes me sick to see advertising because it's completely phony and completely blatant programming of people. But if they're using that black magic in politics and advertising in the media and entertainment, where's the counter magic?
Tell us about, let's go into that then, John, and tell us a little bit about the counter magic, and also about this idea that you mentioned before, the immunity. How do we develop and develop the immunity to resist the spreading of this dementia?
You know, it's been difficult for me to present what I know because I really don't have any ego invested in it. I don't want to be a cult leader. I don't want to be necessarily famous or recognized or anything. But I do believe that my recovery of the Sophia myths of the ancient mysteries and my disclosure of the practices in those mysteries is a unique piece of information. And I'm sorry that I have to say that myself, but I do have to point that out. As far as I know, it's unique. No one else is talking about this in this particular way. You know that there's been a tremendous amount of things written about the Nag Hammadi writings in Coptic that were found in December 1945 in Egypt. I was born in December 1945 and may have been born in the very week that those documents were discovered. And I have spent a great deal of my time recovering the mystery knowledge in those documents. Well, you can read many books by other scholars about Nag Hammadi. You won't find anything like what John Lash is saying. That bothers me a little because I don't want to appear to ask people to see me as special. But at the same time, I do believe that what I have been developing is very special indeed. Why so? I'll give you two reasons, and this is by way of answering your question about immunity and beyond immunity, about overcoming this black magic on the planet. The practice of the ancient mysteries, of the ancient pagan mysteries, was based on a story, the myth of the goddess Sophia, or the Aeon Sophia, to use a Gnostic term. I'm a comparative mythologist. I've looked at myths from all over the world. I've analyzed every creation myth that you can think of, from the Aboriginal creation myths to the ancient Greek mythology, Japanese, the Hopi, the Inuit, you name it. I tell you, on my best professional opinion, there is no myth of planetary evolution that explains the origin of the human species, explains our relation to the earth, the nature of the earth, the divinity of the earth, the divine powers invested in us, the risk of archontic or deviant powers, that is to say, the risk of a psychosis or schizophrenia within our own species. All of these elements are uniquely described in one story, the story of the goddess Sophia, and not in any other myth. I've elaborated that story in my book and on the website. People can go and read it. It's a story. It's a myth. Why is it so important? First of all, because it's a myth of what that actually describes planetary evolution. It's not a myth in the sense of a fiction or invention. It's a myth that is a poetic and mythological rendition of certain events. And the mysteries were guided by this myth. People taught this myth and shared this myth, and it was the foundation of their whole vision of life. And I believe that this myth is the planetary myth that our species needs in order to pull itself together and to understand its own and realize its own empowerment. The second thing about the mysteries that I have disclosed in my book is what the method of the mysteries was. You know, if you read ancient accounts about the mysteries, one of the things that they say, ancient scholars say this, and also certain modern scholars, such as G.R.S. Mead, who was a theosophist at the beginning of the 20th century, the initiates of the mysteries were the great teachers and educators of humankind. Now just think about that for a moment. And I would like to ask you, if anyone thinks that the current representatives of the globalist / Illuminati control freak cult derived out of the mysteries, then I would ask you, would you consider these people to be great educators and teachers of mankind?
Well, in one sense, I would say yes, actually.
How so?
Depending on how you view it, of course, but I also recognize in the process of these orders and the global elite that are in charge right now, I recognize the problem that they potentially are behind the dumbing down, if you will, of humanity, but also their presence and their actions today spawns people to, or urges people to rise up. You know, it draws something out of us. Without them, the question is if we would have been in the awakening process. A lot of us are in the process. A lot of people still have to go through it. If you go out and ask people on the street, the majority don't even know about all of this stuff that we're discussing today, John. But if we're talking about this, the few people who are at least beginning in the process of awakening to this reality, then I can see that they are also playing a role in all of this, if you follow my line of thinking there.
Well, they play an adversarial role. I would agree with that.
Yes.
The challenge that they present to us forces us to educate ourselves and to wake up.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But they cannot in any way be compared to the initiates of the mysteries who were truly educators. They taught people to read and write. They taught the sciences and the arts. They founded the great universities and libraries of the ancient world. So what happened in the mysteries were largely more like a collegiate or educational system. This is how they operated. And this is not just my opinion. I've documented this.
Yeah.
But what was at the core of the mysteries that made them really special was that there was the experience of their method of teaching. And that I've called that instruction by the light. So the ultimate secret of the mysteries that they were people who were initiated were not allowed to discuss publicly was this experience of the light, or the organic light, as I call it. And that experience was the inviolable core of the mysteries. And that was how the mystery initiates themselves acquired their higher knowledge. It was through the encountering the organic light that they were able to realize their own godlike potential, that is the divine intelligence in us, in everywhere in nature. It's in the snails, it's in the clouds, but it's in us in a particular way. And they realized the divine intelligence in us without becoming inflated into thinking that they were gods on earth, or that they could control the world through some kind of godlike posturing, you see? And it's difficult to convey, perhaps, the sanctity of that experience. If you want to think that there's one thing in human experience that could never be perverted or violated, then that is it. And if you go to metahistory and you read, go to Lydia's Well and read the little piece called Lydia's Vow, you see how Lydia, as my colleague, explains that the vow to not describe this light as I'm describing it to you now, and I can describe it in more detail, the vow to not describe it was a way to protect that experience. But those initiates knew that at a certain time in the future it would be necessary to come out and say openly and publicly what the organic light is, and how that experience is accessible to every person on earth. That is the most intimate form, the most intimate access we can have to the divinity of the earth itself. Because that light is actually the emanation of the goddess Sophia. It is her pure emanation as a divine being. And it is something very specific and particular. It's not like anything else. It's a unique phenomenon to be encountered in a heightened state. So the mysteries were essentially provided, they essentially provided to anyone who wanted the opportunity to be taken to that light and shown that light. Now, a lot of people couldn't see it, or a lot of people could see it, they couldn't retain it. But among the many thousands and thousands of people, because it was an egalitarian process, who were taken by the initiates and shown the light, some of them saw it and were able then to go and see it again themselves. And it was through their direct relationship to that light that they became initiates, and they carried on the great teaching and visionary practices of those mysteries.
Mm.
As far as I know, I'm the first person to actually disclose this openly, what happened. Talking to you as if I was someone who was there, and talking to you as if you could be there. That's the way it has to be told, as if you could be there, because you can be there. This experience of the organic light is not obligatory to anyone. You may hear about it and think, what's that? I'm not interested. You may be interested and want to study about it. Then read metahistory.org and Google the organic light, or read my book. You may find that you're really attracted, and you say, I want to have this experience. That is the beginning of the retrieval of mystery knowledge, is to have that experience directly. That is to go back to the core from which those initiates themselves were enlightened. And this is the time when this must be made known, because in the experience and power and wisdom of that light comes the magic for our own process.
So this is what you're talking about here is more of an experience than literal knowledge in that sense. I mean, you might attain this then by reading certain things and getting the knowledge about it, but ultimately what you're describing is about an experience, not about a book in that sense.
It is an experience.
Yeah.
It is an experience. And one of the things that we've learned, Henrik, about shamanic experiences is that they are consistent when they are done in the right setting and discipline. It's widely thought, unfortunately, because of a recreational use of psychoactive plants and because of a lot of ignorance around shamanism, even today, it's widely thought that someone takes a psychoactive plant like psilocybin mushroom or iboga or ayahuasca, and then they go off into a series of sort of chaotic hallucinations or whatever. As a matter of fact, you probably know, in the iboga cult and in the ayahuasca cult, when the neophytes come in and 3 or 4 of them take the sacred medicine, they have their visions. The veterans or elders, consisting of men and women, sitting around them, don't necessarily take the sacred plant at that session. They know exactly what the neophytes are experiencing who've taken it.
Mm.
In other words, you have to recognize, and this is a big step for many people, but try to recognize, I'm not saying you have to, because you don't have to do anything as far as I'm concerned, but try, if you will, consider, if you will, that there are certain mystical experiences in heightened states which are totally veracious and consistent. And this is one of them. Those who experience the organic light know exactly what they're seeing, and everyone sees the same thing. And then out of that experience comes an absolute wellspring of teaching and wisdom, healing, vision, play, erotic awakening, immunity. It is the body, the organic light is the living body of the goddess, who is the embodied spirit of this planet.
And so would you say then that the adversary to this is now then this dementia, this psychosis that you were talking about, that there is if you will, then a kind of a battle going on here between these forces, or is this totally external? This is not about a battle at all.
It's not about a battle, and I'm glad you brought that up. I really don't think it is. In my book, Not in His Image, there's one section where I quote some Neoplatonic philosopher, I think it's Plotinus, who says that, there's no contest. The sacred allows no contest. There's no contest where the sacred does nothing that can compete with or overwhelm the sacred. The situation with humanity is that by having lost touch with nature itself, and then, at a deeper sense, having failed to recognize and perpetuate this meeting with the light, that we have strayed away from our own intelligence. We have strayed away. We have become demented. But the dementia is a mental and spiritual illness that can be healed by contact with the light and by other means. But it's not about a battle. The forces that are mind controlling and mind fucking the human species have absolutely no power over the organic light, and they have no equivalent to it. None whatsoever. I assure you, there is no absolute battle of light and darkness. That is a very misleading and erroneous myth. But that is a myth that is embraced by the perpetrators because it serves them very well. That's why they want to lead the world toward an apocalypse or a Holocaust. That's in their script.
Yeah. John, do you think that this is, we can begin here to round things up with the first hour on some of these notes here, but do you think that this then is in one way, if this sickness has come into humanity and primarily then the psyche of humanity, is this done by, this might be a weird question though, but is this done by a higher force in order to, if you will then, root out some of the people who are sick, much in the same way if we look at a human body or something like that. If we get a bruise or something happens with our body, the body right away starts to working at getting rid of the dead flesh or something like that. That we're looking at a kind of a pruning process here in a weird kind of way, and this is just a very unfortunate way that we see this playing out in the world today. Or can we make any kind of other analogies here to what we're facing?
Boy, that's really an important question, Henrik. I think that we're far enough along in our investigation of the great orchestration of social evil. Call it the New World Order, the Illuminati, call it what you like. I think we're far enough along in that investigation that we might benefit from refining some of our language, especially in regard to this that you're asking me right now. I'll give you my best shot. The Gnostics, who didn't call themselves Gnostics, by the way, that was an insult that was applied to them by Christian ideologues and their enemies. It meant smartass or know-it-all. The Gnostics never called themselves Gnostici. They called themselves telestai, which means we who are aimed.
Yes.
We who are aimed. And by that they meant that they were aimed or focused by the story of the divine Sophia. That was their aim. The story guided them in everything they did. Now, the Gnostics warned about what they called plane being the main technique of the archons or mind parasites. It doesn't matter where you think these mind parasites come from. All that matters is that you would understand the nature of mental parasitism and mental and dementia. And plane means to stray. So the problem is not that there is some great divine plan of retribution here and humanity is being called. We're in this condition of dementia because we've strayed. We've strayed from the place in the evolutionary niche of nature where we can thrive. And when we stray, we become more and more demented. The pagan simply means a person of the country. Paganus is a Latin word. It means country, peasant, country dweller.
Yeah.
Pagans were not Satanists. They did not sacrifice babies or practice human sacrifice. Pagans did not practice human sacrifice. This is a very serious piece of disinformation. I'm not saying that instances of human sacrifice didn't occur in the ancient world. They've always occurred. The pagans were the people who had not strayed. They did not stray. They remained in their ecological and bioregional niche, and they practiced their life in a ritual sanctity and a bond with nature. As soon as we stray from that bond and that ritual observation of our life in nature, we become demented. And we are now reaching the extreme limit of that dimension. But there's no grand plan about it. Not that I see. I think that's part of the psychotic mentality of the perpetrators. They wanted to make us think that there's some kind of a plan, and we're not in on it, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's about.
Well, don't go for it.
Exactly, it's about setting yourself outside of that and becoming more of an observer of it, and obviously again then instigate the change that we personally, individually as well, want to see in the world, and don't get involved in that battle, because this will feed more into it, right?
We need to inform ourselves of any kind of treachery or deception that is happening in the social order. Obviously, that's a responsibility of any social person in whatever society you live in, Sweden, Spanish, Indonesian. But the change can only come one person at a time. And it only comes from the inside of each person who reconnects and realigns to the earth. Because the earth is our mother source, and it is the source of our intelligence. And all of the healing and vision that we need is in our connection to the earth. And that is precisely what the globalist perpetrators don't have. They don't have that.
And what you've been talking about here, John, is basically the story then that outline this process and how in one way we can read about the myths, in terms of this story, and hence get a better idea of what the experience is that you mentioned, that you talked about before. And
sure, I wanted to say in closing this session that the myth that I'm, obviously strongly hyping, the myth of the divine Sophia. It's not John Lash's creation, okay? Please be reassured, folks. I didn't invent this myth. I just restored it from the existing fragments. But even more important, consider that this myth is not a totalitarian story that's imposed on you. It's a vision story that inspires and nurtures your own divine understanding, like no other story you will ever find.
So, John, tell us then a little bit more about your book here, about your website, and basically if you have any, let's say, one-on-one kind of, basics for people who want to read more about this, where they can go specifically on your website in order to read up on some of this, and if they want to dig further into it.
Thanks for asking, Henrik. I just finishing now the revamping of the so-called site guide of my website. So if you go to www.metahistory.org, you get the home page. In the left-hand column, under the face of Kali, you'll see it says Site Guide. Click on Site Guide. I've just revamped it. It's going to be completely done on the 31st, and I'm going to add an audio clip that will be kind of me speaking and taking you on a guided tour through the site, section by section. There are 13 sections of metahistory.org. And with the new site guide, you will be able to see and preview a little bit of what is in each of these sections. And I hope that it will be much more user-friendly than it has been before, because people have been complained about getting lost in metahistory because it's the equivalent of, 10 or 12 books.
It's very big, yeah.
Yeah, but basically it consists of two parts. One is things to help people criticize and analyze belief systems, especially beliefs about the Messiah and superhuman powers and cosmic plans and things of that sort. And secondly, it contains the Gaia Sophia material, which is the orientation toward our connection, each individual's intimate connection with the divinity of the earth. And that's what the site is about. And instead of fascist or authoritarian super race theory or master race theory, absolutely do not endorse it at all. I think it's despicable, and I have no interest in that. And I did not pick up that element in Nietzsche. I did not take Nietzsche's writings about the Superman in that direction. There are a number of key claims that are made about the mysteries and Gnostics in connection with the mysteries that really need to be corrected. And one of these is the claim of deification. Deification, that is, the turning of a human being into a god, or in the same sense, achieving a superhuman state. Something that you will often read in writings of scholars who expound about the mysteries, and also in talks of current people who are saying that there was something bad in the mysteries. They will both give you the same piece of information. They will say that the goal of initiation in the ancient pagan mysteries was some kind of deification. That is to say, the turning of the human being into a divine being, or the realization of some divine empowerment. Well, that is simply not the case. It is not the case in the sense that initiation in the mysteries would have fostered in people a sense of being superhuman or godlike, and therefore superior to all other people.
Tell us a little bit about the basically your background in terms, well, what I reckon got you started in all this. So we can talk about the philosophies of Friedrich Nietzsche a little bit and how he influenced your life and your work as well. Is he the primary philosopher who got your eyes open to these subjects to begin with, John?
Well, Nietzsche, I mentioned Nietzsche in the beginning, in the preface to my book, Not in His Image. And I describe in there how when I encountered Thus Spake Zarathustra, and I read a little bit of Nietzsche. I was only 17 at the time. I was living in a very small fishing village in Maine called Friendship, Maine. And I had nobody to, talk to, but I was deeply impacted by this philosopher. I have to say that what impressed me about Nietzsche was that he dared to say that Christianity was a crapulent and dangerous faith. And since I was living in a tiny little community of 900 people that was dominated by a Christian cult, I was happy to hear that someone of his stature say that, because that's exactly how I felt at the age of 17. And so the way that I have followed Nietzsche and attempted to complete his work is in his critique of Christianity. Because he didn't really critique Christianity very well. He only pointed out a couple of things about it. And I vowed when I read Nietzsche that I would carry that critique to its final conclusion, which is what I do. And I want to point out that I have nothing against Christians as people. I've lived with Christians. I've known many of them all my life. I'm talking about the belief system and the ideology of Christianity.
So if you will, John, tell us a little bit about the mysteries and what you mean with the mysteries in regards to your writing and research, John.
Well, the mysteries, as you know, have been one of the primary subjects of my work. Certainly, my book, Not in His Image, contains more information and elaboration about the nature of the mysteries, their origin, the practices that were done in them, and so forth, than any other book, to my knowledge. Don't want to be blowing my own horn here, but it is simply a fact, as far as I know, that you will not find any other book or any other source on the internet which gives you such an intimate and complete view of what the pagan mysteries were. The mysteries of the pagan world, the Mediterranean world, and the Near East and Egypt during the centuries before the Christian era. And I'd like to say here, to start out, just before we go into the subject, that I'd like to pose a question, well, why is this subject so important? Because after all, the mysteries that we're going to talk about a little bit here are very ancient. They were eliminated, radically destroyed. Their teachers were persecuted and murdered. A large part of almost all of the literature of the mysteries was destroyed, burned. And there were no mysteries practiced, no mystery religions and no mystery cults operating in Europe after the Death Sea. Talking about a belief system, I'm not talking about flesh and blood people. I do not hate Christians, but I do despise the belief system that has establish itself in the world as Christianity. And as you know, I have analyzed that belief system at length. I call it salvationism, and it's a salvationist faith. And I truly believe that this salvationist faith is a toxic ideology. It's a pathological and psychotic outbreak of the human mind, and it's very dangerous for our species. So it was Nietzsche that initially put me on that path of, gave me the boost, you could say, to make my critique of Christianity, which you'll find in Not in His Image. But as far as the mysteries are concerned, that's a different story. Nietzsche didn't write anything about the mysteries, and it was not through Nietzsche that I got turned in that direction.
But there's one thing in Nietzsche that kind of a little bit dovetails with this idea as well. I mean, he wrote about the concept of the Superman, for instance, and, and the Nazis have been, blamed for adopting this idea a little bit as well, and they were also, from their point of view, then steeped in the occult and have occult roots and so forth, and that this spawned this murderous, volatile political philosophy, pretty much. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. First of all, I want to say that I do not adopt or endorse Nietzsche's concept of the Superman in the sense of any kind of Hypatia in 415 AD. As you know, that incident of the murder of Hypatia is the opening chapter of my book.
Yes.
So I would like to say, well, what are we doing here? Why are we dragging ourselves back into this ancient religious movement, this ancient spiritual movement, which is long dead? Why is it important? I think that at the end of this interview, I hope that at the end of this interview, it will be clear to your listeners that our knowledge of what the mysteries were is important, because the mysteries are part of the solution. They were part of the solution for humanity when they existed, and they are part of the solution today. Whereas all that we learn on the internet and in many, many books about the Illuminati, the reptilian bloodlines, the use of mind control and occultism in a master program of totalitarian control, all that we hear about this is all about the problem. And we hear a lot about this. But the mysteries are about the solution. And I truly believe that if we go back and look at what the mysteries were in their true nature and what was done in the mysteries, it will provide us with the right orientation to face the situation in the world today and this apparent takeover of society by a totalitarian or globalist elite. So that's why the subject is so important.
Absolutely.
I hope that's clear.
Absolutely. And maybe if you like, in brief here, John, you can also